December 2023, Washington. NASA scientists release findings from an independent UAP study. At the Pentagon, AARO continues investigating military encounters involving unidentified aerial phenomenon. Meanwhile, civilian researchers launch new sensor systems aimed at tracking anomalies in the skies using machine learning, multispectral imaging, radar integration, and artificial intelligence. Something remarkable is happening. For decades, the UFO subject existed largely outside mainstream scientific legitimacy. Researchers avoided it. Academic institutions distanced themselves from it. Funding was scarce, careers could be damaged, and the stigma surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena created a powerful institutional barrier. But now, that barrier is beginning to weaken. Not because science suddenly confirmed extraterrestrial visitation, it is not, but because modern governments, military systems, and scientific organizations increasingly acknowledge something important. There are aerial incidents occurring that deserve structured analysis, and perhaps the most important shift in the modern disclosure era is not political, it is scientific. Tonight, we investigate why mainstream science historically avoided UAP research, how military sensor technology changed the conversation, why stigma became a major institutional obstacle, NASA's recent involvement, the role of AARO, the emergence of civilian scientific initiatives like the Galileo Project, the challenge of incomplete datasets, and why modern science may finally be entering the UAP conversation seriously. Because this episode is not about proving extraterrestrials, it's about understanding how science responds when confronted with unresolved aerospace anomalies. This is UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones, and tonight we examine the scientific frontier of the unknown. For decades, serious scientific investigation of UFOs remained extremely limited, and contrary to popular belief, the biggest obstacle was not necessarily government secrecy, it was stigma. Academic institutions operate through peer review, funding structures, professional credibility, publication standards, and reputational risk. The UFO topic threatened all of those things. Researchers feared career damage, ridicule, association with conspiracy culture, and loss of institutional legitimacy. As a result, many scientists simply avoided the subject entirely, even when military sightings continued occurring quietly in the background. This created a paradox. The public remained fascinated by UFOs, but mainstream science largely refused to engage directly. And when science avoids a controversial subject, the informational vacuum often becomes filled with speculation instead. Another major challenge involved evidence itself. Science depends on repeatability, measurable data, controlled observation, and independently verifiable evidence. Most UFO reports historically failed to meet those standards. Eyewitness testimony alone is difficult to analyze scientifically. Human perception is imperfect. Memory reconstruction occurs. Environmental conditions distort interpretation. Optical illusions happen. Psychological expectations influence observation. This does not mean witnesses are dishonest, far from it. Many military pilots and observers appear entirely sincere. But sincerity alone does not automatically create scientific certainty. And that distinction is critical because one of the greatest tensions in UAP research is the gap between credible witnesses and incomplete datasets. Then the technological landscape changed. Modern military systems began integrating advanced radar, infrared tracking, electro-optical targeting systems, multi-sensor fusion platforms, satellite analysis, and AI-assisted detection systems. Now, for the first time, anomalous aerial encounters were sometimes being observed across multiple systems simultaneously. That changed everything because the modern UAP conversation increasingly shifted away from stories alone towards sensor data, And from a scientific perspective, that transition mattered enormously. The question was no longer simply, did someone see something unusual? The question became, why are advanced military systems repeatedly tracking objects that remain difficult to identify in real time? That is a fundamentally different problem. The disclosure era accelerated dramatically after 2017. The public learned about ATIP, Navy encounters, the Tic Tac incident, and military videos later authenticated by the Pentagon. Again, this did not confirm extraterrestrials, but it did something equally significant. It normalized institutional discussion. The government openly acknowledged military personnel were encountering aerial phenomena that warranted investigation. And once the Pentagon publicly entered the conversation, scientific institutions could no longer dismiss the issue quite as easily. The stigma barrier began weakening, slowly but unmistakably. Then came another historic shift: NASA. For decades, many critics argued mainstream science ignored UAP entirely. But in 2022 and 2023, NASA established an independent study team examining unidentified anomalous phenomena from a scientific perspective. This was enormously important symbolically because NASA approached the subject cautiously, methodically, without sensationalism. Researchers repeatedly emphasize there was currently no evidence confirming extraterrestrial origins, but they also stress better data collection was urgently needed. And perhaps that became the most important scientific conclusion of all. The problem was not necessarily lack of curiosity, the problem was a lack of high quality data. This remains a central scientific challenge: data fragmentation. Most UAP incidents occur unexpectedly. Sensor coverage varies. Military systems remain classified. Civilian recording quality is inconsistent, and many encounters lack complete data sets. Scientists repeatedly face the same problem: insufficient information. This is where public misunderstanding often emerges. People frequently ask, why didn't science just solve the mystery? But science cannot function effectively without reliable data environments, and UAP incidents rarely provide perfect observational conditions. That does not invalidate every report, but it explains why definitive scientific conclusions remain difficult. Now, a new generation of civilian scientific initiatives is emerging. Perhaps most notably the Galileo Project, founded by Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb. Sorry about the pronunciation. The project aims to study anomalous aerial phenomena using dedicated sensor systems designed specifically for scientific analysis. This is a major shift. Historically, scientists largely depended on military leaks, witness testimony, or accidental recordings. Now, some researchers are building systems specifically designed to collect calibrated data, multispectral imagery, radar integration, and machine learning assisted anomalous analysis. Whether these projects ultimately discover anything extraordinary remains unknown, but institutionally, their existence represents a major transformation. Science is beginning to engage directly. Another critical scientific dimension involves human perception itself, because not every UAP report necessarily represents exotic technology. Some incidents may involve atmospheric effects, optical distortions, misidentified craft, sensor artifacts, or cognitive interpretation errors. The human brain constantly attempts to construct coherent narratives from incomplete information, especially during unambiguous situations. That is why psychological plays such an important role in UAP analysis, not to dismiss witnesses, but to understand how perception functions under uncertainty. And importantly, modern scientific investigation increasingly recognizes multiple explanations may coexist simultaneously. Some cases may receive conventional explanations, others may remain unresolved due to insufficient data. and a smaller number may continue resisting immediate interpretation entirely. One of the biggest complications in UAP science is classification. Many of the best sensor systems belong to the military, which creates a paradox. The highest quality data may remain inaccessible to civilian researchers. Governments cannot always release radar capabilities, sensor architecture, tracking systems, or operational procedures publicly, because doing so could expose defense vulnerabilities. As a result, scientific analysis often collides directly with national security restrictions, and this tension creates enormous frustration. Researchers want better access. Military institutions prioritize operational secrecy. Both positions are understandable, but if the result is fragmented scientific visibility. Ultimately, modern institutions may be confronting something deeper than UFO mythology. They may be confronting unresolved uncertainty itself. Military systems are designed around identification. Science is designed around measurable analysis. Yet UAP incidents frequently emerge inside incomplete informational environments, and that creates what analysts increasingly describe as strategic uncertainty. Not necessarily evidence of extraterrestrials, but unresolved aerospace ambiguity operating, I should say, inside critical defense environments. That alone is operationally significant. And perhaps this explains why governments increasingly treat UAPs as an intelligence issue, a sensor issue, a scientific issue, and a national security issue simultaneously. Now, the landscape is evolving rapidly. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, anomalous sensor grids, global aerospace monitoring systems, civilian satellite networks, the future of UAP investigation may look radically different from the past. Instead of isolated eyewitness accounts, future investigations may rely on continuous multi-sensor analysis, AI anomaly detection, real-time atmospheric modeling, and global data sharing infrastructure. This could dramatically improve scientific visibility, or it could reveal that many incidents have conventional explanations. At this stage, both possibilities remain open, and serious science requires maintaining that balance carefully. For decades, the UFO subject existed in a strange territory between public fascination and institutional avoidance. Now, that boundary is changing. Governments investigate openly, scientists cautiously engage, military systems collect expanding data sets, and the stigma that once suppressed serious discussion is slowly weakening. This does not mean the mystery is solved, far from it. The evidence remains incomplete, the data remains fragmented, and many claims remain disputed. But perhaps the most important transformation is this: the scientific community is beginning to acknowledge that unresolved aerial anomalies deserve structured analysis rather than automatic dismissal. That shift alone is historic, because regardless of where the evidence ultimately leads, the future UAP investigation will likely depend not on speculation, but on rigorous scientific inquiry operating inside increasingly sophisticated technological systems. And perhaps that is how humanity finally begins bridging the gap between mystery and understanding. This has been UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones. Thank you for tuning in. Please share the episode, make sure you've subscribed, and go tell your mum about today's episode.